Hello, I'm Paul MacDonnell, and you are welcome to Focus on the Digital Markets Act. This is the first of a series of short podcasts in which I interview experts about how Europe's new Digital Markets Act, or DMA, could impact on the Union's economy and indeed its security. I'm delighted to be joined today from Washington, DC by Shane Tews, who is a visiting fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Shane is an expert on many aspects of digital policy, from cybersecurity to trade, and she's taken a particular interest in the DMA. She was formerly a Deputy Associate Director in the Office of Cabinet Affairs in the George H.W. Bush White House, and more recently has worked on Capitol Hill as a Legislative Director for a Member of Congress. Shane, it's really great to have you here. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Let me just kick off with the following. Okay. So the European Union is moving forward with its Digital Markets Act, or DMA, and this is a preemptive regulation for the purposes of altering the competition landscape of Europe's digital economy. Could you step into the mind or the minds of Europe's policymakers, if you will, and from their point of view, tell me what it is you think they're trying to achieve with this?
If I try to step into their mind, I just have a lot of questions. So, why do we want to demand that tech companies lower their guard around security is my first question, because it is just riddled with the ability to enhance cyber attacks. I can appreciate governments, but concerned that they do not have the innovative cycles that they're seeing us go through here in the United States. We obviously have some very wealthy, very successful companies because they innovated their way into a whole new way that we use digital mediums. I mean, we're all, especially during the pandemic, we've all been, hopefully enjoyed the fact that we can get things delivered to our house. Thank you, Amazon, or in other things, food, and the simplicity of which it is done because they've moved to an app economy. So it's just an easier form factor than the old days, the kludgy days when we were on the web and things didn't always connect. And what the challenge is what they're basically asking us to do is disconnect a lot of these things that are really functioning very well. And that part, and we're doing that here in the United States as well with some antitrust / competition bills that are before the Senate Judiciary, and the House has done some as well.
Sure.
I don't understand why we want to go backwards. Let's go forwards.
I mean, what the Europeans are doing, and I was going to tackle this later, but we might as well tackle it head on now. What the Europeans are doing with the DMA is not so wildly out of whack with how the Americans are approaching platforms as it would have been maybe 5 or 10 years ago.
Right.
I mean, Lina Khan in particular, she wrote this famous article in, I think, a law journal, which really spelled out a kind of manifesto. Lina Khan, I should remind our listeners, is the chairperson of the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. But she spelled out what was, looked like a manifesto for a return to a kind of structural approach to competition, which is really pre-Robert Bork and pre that whole, Chicago School, Reagan movement.
Right. Yeah. So what we currently work off of is the idea of is there consumer harm? Like, is there a harm that we need to tackle? And the Federal Trade Commission very specifically is consumer driven, and unlike the Department of Justice over here, which would be something that is, possibly a criminal activity at at the enterprise level. And that's a good question. The thing is, who is being harmed by these activities that somebody like Lina Khan wants to limit or curtail or review? And I come out with a lot of, I don't know, because we look at, like, one of the things that has been recommended is limiting mergers and acquisitions for these big companies. Well, go back 2 decades, and Microsoft did not invent spell check. They bought that company. And the company that was pretty happy to become part of the Microsoft enterprise. And, ideally, a lot of these companies that come out of Silicon Valley, that is their actual growth model. They don't think that they can grow as an individual company. They hope to become part of a bigger platform that can then incorporate what they do. And then that also gives them the flywheel effect of having more capital available to them to then continue to create with their engineers.
So, I mean, when it comes to what the DMA is trying to achieve, we do have the track record of antitrust cases and competition law cases, as we tend to call them in Europe, against big tech, going back to Microsoft. And these didn't really, but by the time whatever judgments landed, the target had moved on, or some other company like Google had come along with a whole new thing. And so it wasn't really that relevant. This brings us back in a way, back to what it is the European policymakers are trying to achieve. And it seems to me that they are trying to design, into the system conditions for Europe to produce these digital champions and its own platform champions and so on. And that this seems to be based on a few strange ideas. One of which is, of course, the importance of data as an asset. But I mean, what's the, like, if it's obvious that this kind of policy hasn't been effective in the past, what's motivating governments to return to it? What's motivating the European Commission, or even Lina Khan and the Biden White House? Well, maybe not. I don't know as much about the Biden White House. Certainly, some legislators in the US are quite keen to get some kind of, corporate control over the structure of the digital economy. What's motivating this?
You are spot on that. First of all, you can't regulate your way to competition. It doesn't work that way. You can't decide that you're going to crush the people that have innovation and capital and then try to lift up some people to perhaps get there. There's just no case I can think of where that has actually functioned. The two things they want is what everybody wants who's in, it's politics, and what people want in politics is power. And one of the things that allows them to have more power is leverage points over companies like this. And when you think about that, that's the way the Chinese communists are dealing with capitalism. It's communist capitalism. They're basically telling, Tencent and Huawei and all these other companies, how they will manage and use their information flow. We've seen that huge pullback recently on data flow, and them talking Didi, basically saying you will not go public over on the New York Stock Exchange. It's a control mechanism. And they basically very much put their companies in check and said, China first, and what's good for China. Now, there's still a lot of corruption that goes on in that, but the ones that play the game get to win with the government. In the case of, for here in the United States, most of these people are running for president. I mean, Amy Klobuchar is running for president, and she wants to be a socialist. Sorry, that's very strong, but it's that's her. She wants to show that she's a person at the local level with the people, and the people don't feel like they're winning right now. And so if they just crush these big companies, that's going to be a win. And it's not a win for anyone.
I mean, I see what I call, I'm not sure if I don't believe I invented this idea, but a kind of convergent set of anxieties. So you've got the kind of anxiety about misinformation or disinformation, or I think the Department of Homeland Security has come up with a new one, which is malinformation or something like this. And so this is anxiety about what, how platforms are managing information and the impact on society and politics and democracy and so on. And then you have obviously the particular European anxiety, which is not absent entirely in America, but of dominant platforms in a kind of a winner takes all world where Amazon eats everything, Amazon eats everybody, and so you have this kind of anxiety. Now and so politicians and policymakers, I suspect, feel disempowered by all of this because they've probably got their own prejudices given their own backgrounds. They've come up through law schools and they've come up through the public sector where they're used to having government play this key role, or at least not be so rudely pushed aside by economics. And of course, you have the kind of speech information anxieties around supposed misinformation or disinformation, and platforms being asked to take action against individuals based on supposed disinformation. And so all of this, to me, appears to give the platforms, well, it appears to it creates a kind of a license for action. And in a way, the anxiety about, the sort of threats to our democracy is a kind of moral license for them to interfere in other ways. It just, because it kind of persuades the population, hey, these guys are a source of real harm online. And so therefore we can economically regulate them. And you won't have a problem with that because, it's a hydra. It kind of creates a kind of it sort of spreads anxiety about social harm coming from platforms.
So the cruel irony to all that is the unintended consequences, which will happen both with the DMA and if we pass legislation over here in the United States, which is the two most important things in the digital economy for the consumer, for citizens, are trust and safety. And you need to trust the devices. You need to trust the information that goes on the devices. This whole idea that both sides of the pond, they want to do what's called side loading, which says anybody should be able to put information on my phone or my device. And so what I currently do is the information, I'm an Apple user, is curated by the App Store. They have a barrier to entry. They have to show that they meet a level of criteria that they're planning on this being something that is safe on my device. Side loading would say that that is disallowed and any piece of garbage can go on my phone. So we're we're taping this just right after Valentine's Day. I did a piece yesterday on dating apps because I became fascinated with, during the pandemic, they actually just did gangbusters. It's now Match itself is a $20 billion business of all the majors. So you look at that and you say, so I delved into it, and writing the piece actually made me very sad because 80% of the, not necessarily the ones that Match, but there were 50 just US new dating apps. There were 2,000 in the United, just over 2,000 now globally. 80% of them are scammers. Yeah. And if you don't have a level of understanding of what these apps can do, you don't have the measures like Apple has put in place saying, this app is asking for your contacts, allow, disallow. This app is asking for your GPS, allow or disallow. Now, you can be very proactive. It's fine. You can say, take all my contacts, always know where I am, share my information with everyone. That is an option for you, but it shouldn't be the default. You should have.
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And then the other thing is,
I think there are certain things that the European Commission has done, which, I tend to say that the European Commission at times has certainly asked some very good questions about the regulation or about how platforms run and what their impact is. I don't always agree with the answers they've given to their own questions, because they tend to be quite interventionist, quite draconian.
So in a parallel space, we just had the big climate change event a couple of months ago. And, there's this whole idea now that everything about the environment should be placed into any business or policy plan. So we should be looking at it not only as government, but, corporations should be looking at this, and they should be thinking about their global print on the world and the way that they use things. We need that same idea for cybersecurity, which cybersecurity, most people don't understand it. So they assume someone else is taking care of it, which is a terrible assumption.
Well, let's look in detail about the DMA and the cybersecurity, the security aspects of the DMA, because you have a kind of an industrial policy with one arm, which is, cracking open the platforms and saying you must give access to third parties and you must give access to even competitors. But of course, this has been done completely blind to the security, privacy, GDPR type implications for this. So what's the real threat there? I mean, it seems that there's a host of unintended consequences there, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, there's always the question about open source and open platforms, and who then is the gatekeeper. And so the interesting question is, while they're calling all these companies gatekeepers, one of the best things they do is gatekeep on behalf of the consumer. So you used Amazon as an example of, they're very upset because they're candidly really efficient. The one thing that Amazon does very well is they're a logistics company. They get things from A to B, and then to be in the Amazon Prime warehouse where there's, they're people are upset that they think that some of these people think that anyone should be in the warehouse. Well, you have to have a set of criteria that allow you to go into the warehouse. And along the way, one of the things that Amazon's very good at is protecting the data that you share amongst the entire thing, because they are a closed ecosystem. They advertise to you on their platform. But I'm somebody, I like to go in, fetch, and leave. Amazon works perfectly for me. If you don't like it, don't use it. It is not a problem. It's the way I feel about, candidly, I always say this about Las Vegas. I'm a huge fan of Las Vegas. If the whole thing makes you sick to your tummy, don't go there. It's easy. So I don't know why we need to crush a model that's working, because people don't like the efficiency of it. And one of the efficient elements of it is that I feel safe when I use their system, because they've never had a problem with cybersecurity. They take all of that very seriously. And I think that's a good lesson for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, that was something I remember noticing about some of the ride-hailing platforms, that in fact, their own, now, obviously there are cases, because they're such large businesses, there have been some tragic cases where people, criminals obtained licenses and committed crimes against people, against passengers, but it's extremely rare. But I remember somebody pointing out that the basic terms and conditions of using something like Uber, both for the drivers and the customers, and the whole user feedback thing, constituted a more robust regulatory protection for consumers than the actual regulation of taxis and cabs in most big cities. On
both sides of the equation, yeah.
Yeah, so the thing was kind of it was a solution. If anything, in fact, it was better than the regulation of the traditional industry. But I guess with new technology, you always get anxiety, and you get that sort of that kind of fear, and sort of people who are serving certain interests will come up with horror stories about something that happened on Amazon or something that happened on Uber as evidence that we need more regulation for this, whereas it may not be. It may be a random, rare event.
So I had the fortune of having one of the people who were in the test bed for Amazon very early on in Los Angeles. He owned a livery service. That's back then you're taking black cars or taxis. And he said, my drivers want to be able to communicate back when somebody misbehaves, when they have a bad incident. So he wanted to make sure there were two sides to that equation. And what's interesting is it brings a civility into the process with the ability of a penalty if you're uncivil on either side. And right. I know there are, an occasional incident. Unfortunately, some people on this earth are not good people, and you need to find a way to do that. But I feel safer. When I first started taking Ubers or Lyfts, the people in my office went nuts. They go, "You get in some stranger's car?" I go, "When I get in a cab, I don't, unless I get a receipt, I don't know completely who I'm with. When I'm in an Uber, all that information is now on my app, and it's in a system that I can actually track it, and I can." And then the start, everybody's worried about their star system. You don't ever want to get under a 4.7. Well, even if you get under like a 4.5, you start they migrate you off their platform. So there's an interesting immediate feedback loop. I did take a cab because I was at the Kennedy Center the other day. It was almost impossible to try to get a cab. They just won't admit that they need to upgrade how people want to communicate with them and then use their service. And the rest of these companies have figured it out. There'll be companies right behind them that'll do it better. And so we look at what's going on with one of the majors right now, Facebook/Meta, it's they're having trouble right now. And so this whole idea of these thresholds that you have to meet, and I'm sorry, it's your term of use, you don't say returns annual to the turnover. They're already going below the threshold of some of this legislation because of the big dip that they had from their Q4 earnings. So it's just a reminder that the market solves for a lot of problems. The market likes to move on. If you try to cap the market with regulation, it is the most unnatural way to actually let progress happen.
Yeah, I mean, it is. Markets in general are sort of economic democracy, and so when you talk about the will of the people is expressed through markets as well as through voting for public officials. Looking at the DMA and the dangers inherent in sort of foreign actors, or I don't want to say foreign necessarily in a bad way, but certain malicious actors getting access to platforms through this kind of opening out. if platforms are being forced to give access to data or access to software tools to third parties, that this creates potential worry that well, there is a kind of data protection issue here, I guess, but it's just a question of how do you actually, as a consumer, how do you remain confident in a platform if you know the platform is being told to open itself up in all sorts of ways, and no one's really worked out the details of this?
Yeah, I'm fascinated with, basically the GDPR has become the de facto privacy of the globe. We have a similar, CCPA here, sorry to talk acronyms, but I think this crowd will get it, in California. But now when I read the DMA, I see a huge conflict in the idea that you want to create interoperability on these platforms saying, let's go back. GDPR says I need to, when I gather information, it has to be very specific about why I'm gathering that information. Who touches that information has to be very explicit, affordable. And then you go to DMA and it says, no, it needs to be interoperable. So if I'm starting on, let's say, Meta/Facebook, but I want to migrate my photos, my contacts, my conversations, I don't know why people want to do that, but they might want to do that. Now you're completely inverting what you're doing with the GDPR and saying all this information has to be portable. And I don't know who you're, when I'm creating for Facebook/Meta, when they're creating this, they don't know where they're porting the information. So they're actually breaking GDPR to comply with the DMA.
I think, yeah. I mean, one of the problems that has been noticed is that the European courts and European legislators tend not to be paying too much attention to the technology threats or the actual threat of just opening up technology. And so you have these kind of decisions by, I think one was by a Belgian court, and it was I think it was to do with Facebook, and it was they wanted to stop tracking Belgian citizens. I think it was a Belgian court, and that included non-Facebook account holders, and Facebook argued that it needed to differentiate between what they called legitimate and illegitimate visitors to its platform in order to take steps against certain bad actors.
Yeah, with these interoperability bills, that's exactly that. So like one of the challenges, let's say you have photos and they're tagged, and you want to port those photos that started on the the original Facebook application over to whatever the new portal is. You and I are in a photo together and I've tagged you, that metadata will follow you in the most simplistic way to the next platform. Well, you've not given permission to that next platform, and unless that's in the terms of use. So there's a lot of conflict in just the way that information has been utilized up until this point. And is there going to be a 2023 moving forward, whenever you guys get done with the DMA and the trilogues, that the rules are different? And is it okay on how the information that's ported was, there's a lot of challenge to how to manage that. It isn't completely undoable, but it is pretty messy.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we've expressed some anxiety that the European legislators need to start paying attention to how this is going to actually, how it's actually going to happen. There's the kind of how it's going to happen kind of conversation that needs to take place.
And to your earlier point, this is where there's a lot of room for, the criminals to come into the system, because they can come. I mean, Cambridge Analytica, which is, was an interesting lesson for everyone on basically how to design your terms of use and understand who's using your information. This is a redo. It'll happen again, because somebody will figure out how to get in the middle of this disaggregated system. If you go to the ability to, interoperate, and they'll just say, port to my system. And, if their terms of use say, I'm going to suck every piece of information off of you and go sell it to somebody else, unless that's very clear that that is not okay, that is exactly what's going to happen. Yeah,
I think so. I mean, it seems that there's quite a bit of work to do. Shane, I think that's all we have time for. That's really been very useful, and I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about this. So
absolutely, anytime. And I love reading what you're doing, and please keep me updated.
Absolutely. Okay, many thanks.
Okay, bye-bye.